Okay, Philip Lee returning with another episode of Civil War Chat. Today is Sunday, the 22nd of November. I've been out of town. And today's topic is Robert E. Lee Prewitt. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about Robert E. Lee. And for those of you that have an interest in Robert E. Lee, my book, Confederacy at Flood Tide, explains a lot about what made Lee famous as a military commander during the Civil War. But let's go ahead and get started with Robert E. Lee Prewitt. Just give me a second to pull up my notes. Prewitt, spelled Prewitt, is a fictional character from Here to Eternity, which was James Jones's debut novel. It won the National Book Award for Fiction in 1951. A debut novel, to repeat for emphasis, and was released 2 years later as a Hollywood movie, and later in 1979 broadcast as a TV miniseries. There's even been a musical made of it, though I don't think with much success. Like author Jones, at age 17, Prewitt joined America's volunteer army during the Great Depression, and happened to be stationed at Oahu as an infantryman when the Japanese attacked in December 1941. Men that joined the Army during the Great Depression often did so because it was hard to earn a living anywhere else. Author Jones was from downstate Illinois, whereas the fictional Prewitt was from Appalachia, along the Kentucky-West Virginia border, where the yard was covered with coal dust. Although a poor and uneducated man, Prewitt repeatedly demonstrated admirable character. Before he was transferred to Hawaii, he had blinded a boxing opponent and resolved to never again box competitively. On principle, he refused to volunteer for the new company's boxing team, despite steady abuse from team members that was instigated by the company's commander, who wanted him to join so that their record would be improved and the commander in the peacetime army would move up in rank. Against the odds, Prewitt took revenge against a bullying stockade guard who had tormented one of his friends into madness and suicide. So that was the second way he demonstrated his integrity, certainly loyalty, and standing on principle. He gradually won the heart of a beautiful girl, Lorene, who had initially rejected him because of his low status. Although Lorene wanted to return to the mainland financially independent with the money she could make off of her looks, she came to see the greater value of sharing her life with a man of Prewitt's character. She was ready to change her ways and put her trust in the future of Prewitt, or a future with Prewitt, when the Japanese attack changed everything. Prewitt realized his military obligation would put their relationship in a holding pattern. While Lorene was too afraid of losing the love she at last realized she had always wanted. Prewitt left her to rejoin his unit, where he was promptly killed by friendly fire the day after the Japanese attack. Shortly thereafter, Lorene, whose real name was Alma, boarded a ship for the mainland. Another woman, Karen, who was similarly leaving an army lover behind, noticed a pretty girl among the forlorn tableau of women at the ship's railing as it passed Diamond Head. Karen's lover was a master sergeant in the same company with Prewitt and on friendly terms with Prewitt. The master sergeant had shared the story of Prew's death with Karen shortly before Karen boarded the ship. Here is author Jones's excerpted and edited description of the situation. Karen had noticed the girl before. She looked remarkably like Hedy Lamarr. That was a beautiful Hollywood star of the 40s and 50s. Watching her was like being in an art gallery. No one would know there was a war from out here, said the girl. I can almost see where I worked from here. Where did you work? American Factors, said the girl. I was a private secretary. I should think that would have been a position to have hung on to. It was, but I couldn't stay. You see, my fiance was killed on December 7th. Oh, I'm sorry, said Karen. We were planning to be married next month, said the girl. He was shipped over here a year ago. I came over afterwards and took a job so I could be near him. We were both saving our money. We were going to buy a little place up above Kaimuki, I think is the pronunciation. And Karen thought it was these young people, like this couple, and their courage and their level-headedness, unsung, unknown, unheroized, that were making this country the great thing that it was, that made the winning of the war a foregone conclusion. He was a pilot stationed at Hickam Field, said the girl. He tried to taxi his plane off the apron and down the revetments. They made a direct hit on it. Maybe you read about it in the papers. No, said Karen, I didn't. They awarded him the Silver Star and sent it to his mother. She wrote me that she wanted me to have it. Well, I think that's very fine of her, said Karen. Well, they are very fine people, smiled the girl tremulously. He comes from an old Virginia family, the Prewitts. They've lived there since before the Revolution. His great-grandfather was a general under Lee in the Civil War. That's who he's named after, Robert E. Lee Prewitt. Who? Said Karen numbly, recalling the story from her lover. Robert E. Lee Prewitt, answered the girl on the verge of tears. Isn't that a silly old name? No, Karen said. I think it's a fine name. Yes, I'm speaking for myself here. It is a fine name. A name that Karen realized helped shape the people who won World War II and helped make this country what it is today, whether you want to call it great or whatever it is. But it's certainly a place where a lot of people, black and white, want to immigrate into. So that is the story of Robert E. Lee Prewitt. And if you want to know more about Robert E. Lee during his wartime years, The Confederacy at Flood Tide covers June of 1862 to December of 1862, when the Confederacy, in my opinion, came as close as it ever would come to winning its independence. It's remarkable what Lee accomplished then. And it also is important, I think, to realize when we evaluate Confederate soldiers, and particularly those that are critical of Lee and say that his reputation was made post-war by this so-called, quote, air quote, lost cause mythology. Here are a couple of points. Number one, during the Civil War, there was no general as popular among his own men as Robert E. Lee, either North or South. The most famous Union general, Ulysses Grant, never came close in terms of popularity. That popularity, in fact, Lee was beloved by his troops. That is, there's no other example in the Civil War that I can think of. And that's meaningful. Men followed him. And they didn't follow him because he was fighting to preserve slavery. They followed him because they trusted him. Now, here's another reason. This is the second point. Here's another reason they followed him. He slept in a tent. He ate the same food as the ordinary soldiers. That wasn't true of many other commanders, North and South. But particularly, let's take, for example, Ulysses Grant, the other well-known commanding general during the Civil War. He would typically commandeer a Southern home, a prosperous home, where he could make his headquarters comfortably, sleep in a comfortable bed, sleep in a warm house, eat food prepared by the household or the slaves' household, the slaves of the household. He was at a mansion 8 to 10 miles away from Shiloh when the Confederate attack began. He was the commander of that army, that Union Army. He didn't sleep in a tent with his men. He slept in a mansion 8 to 10 miles away from the battlefield. He didn't arrive on the battlefield until it was well underway. So I think those are some important things to consider. Robert E. Lee Prewitt is a name that was adopted by James Jones, a man from Illinois, admittedly at an earlier time. But I would say that what the people of that time knew about Lee and about Grant and about the Civil War is really truly more than what we know now, because the stories were passed down from generation to generation. And this accusation that it was fictional stuff that was passed down, a so-called lost cause mythology, maybe to some extent, but much of it was true. I refer you to Yale professor Carlos Eyre. He was in Cuba as a boy and escaped Castro's Cuba. He wrote a book early in the 2000s, I think around 2004 or something like that, Waiting for Snow in Havana. And I'll never forget the quote that one of the quotes in that book that was really targeted at the people that were falsely interpreting Castro back then and today in terms of his benevolence. Here's what Carlos Eyre said: "Show me history untouched by memories, and you show me lies. Show me lies not based on memories, and you show me the worst lies of all." And the lies that we're hearing about Castro now are some of the worst of all. Similarly, the lies that we're hearing about the Southerners during the Civil War, many of them also are the worst of all. So for Philip Lee and Civil War Chat, thank you for watching. I urge you to click the notification bell in the upper right so that you'll be notified of my future episodes. Thanks again for watching.